Riot Games has announced that Project L is now called 2XKO, which are both interesting names. But I want to talk about how important 2XKO could be to fighting games. It has the potential to change everything about the genre besides them being fighting games. And I think that overall, it could be a very positive change. And yes, I wrote this video like 4 months ago, but I was waiting for something to happen with this game. But now that it's coming, I'm excited and I can talk about this. So let's start there very briefly. I love fighting games. I know a lot of people who do. I'm not the hardest of hardcore. I'm not even great at them. I would say I'm pretty average, and according to rank distribution, I'm dead average, but I really enjoy them, and I want them to be way bigger than they are. The FGC is often viewed as a small, tight-knit community of lovely people who help each other and just want to improve, and there is a lot of great stuff about the FGC, but I think it is small. And that's because fighting games, while they are getting bigger and they are becoming more and more popular as time goes on, they aren't massive. They're not Apex, they're not Call of Duty, they're not Fortnite, and they're definitely not League of Legends. But I think they have the potential to be just as big. For a time, fighting games were the most popular multiplayer game to play. When things started to change, it wasn't just because shooters got popular, it's because shooters leveraged online capabilities. The combination of the technology that allowed for that to happen and the way that they are these big arenas where people could just jump in and have some fun meant that it was accessible and functional. And so the premier multiplayer mode was Team Deathmatch, and then it became Battle Royale, but it was always in that genre. Fighting games then staggered behind and lost popularity, and there's been golden ages and dark ages and arguably a new golden age of fighting games today. But it never grew into this massive thing. One of the main problems was that technology. Now, with things like rollback netcode, it's much better. I think that technology is there for there to be this competitive integrity and this good feeling of playing a fighting game online at this point. So that first piece of the puzzle is in place. But what are the other pieces that are necessary, in my opinion, to reach that mass market appeal? Well, there's a couple of reasons. The first one to mention is I think the general perception of fighting games is that they are very complicated and very difficult to get into. They require a very large time commitment, and the people who play them tend to be very good. Learning fighting games can be very intimidating, and learning them just by playing them is sometimes very difficult because depending on what game you like, playing against other players might have you starting at an enormous skill disparity. And so people are afraid to play them, afraid to approach them, and to get into them. Even though anybody who's into competitive games, in my opinion, should. And why aren't there more players? Well, I think that it's that combination of them being very intimidating, something that people are afraid to approach, and there's always been a dozen things that we could have improved, from tutorials to offline modes to training modes to all sorts of things that could make that easier. But in my opinion, what you really need to get people to learn a difficult and complicated game is a lot of players of different skill levels. And that's where 2XKO can really begin to shine as a game that can change the fighting game model forever. When you have a game that is already intimidating to begin with, and then people have to pay $60 or $70 to even begin to play it, you're not going to get that many players. So I think one of the things that will really ease fighting games as something that people can get into and lead to a lot more people playing them is lowering the barrier of entry to $0. Riot has shown time and time again that it's not just about making the game free, it's also about making it easy to play. Not literally and easy to play, but you can run it on a potato, making it available as much as possible. And in this case, not only are they going to be relying on their very large PC audience, but also on console audiences to fill in this game that has no price tag attached. You can just walk in and start playing. Riot has also historically, at least in the case of League of Legends, I am not that familiar with Valorant, I'm sorry, is pretty friendly to people who don't want to spend any money. Technically, characters are locked behind paywalls in League of Legends and Valorant, I believe, but you can obtain them for free, and of course you can pay to accelerate that process, but that's a different conversation. What really matters is that you need to get people through the door. And the last piece of the puzzle is how people feel responsible in fighting games, because it's just you and another opponent. There's really nothing to ease that tension. You feel like all of the pressure is on you. But 2XKO is a 2v2 fighting game. That's 4 players. You and your friend versus somebody else, and, well, we imagine that they're friend or not. Fighting games have always been and always will be multiplayer games, and they live and die on their player base. But as a social experience, it's normally limited to you versus a friend. So having the opportunity of it being you and a friend versus other people completely changes that dynamic, and I think leads to a much higher probability of people enjoying it, putting it in their main game rotations, and just having it be more present in conversations and more accessible to get people into it when a friend can show you the ropes. And this isn't the first time that this is done. Multiverses, being a platform fighter, that's where I'm from. That's the only fighting games that I'm slightly above average at. Proved that if you make it a 2v2 multiplayer experience, take some of that edge off, you will have great success, which it did. It didn't retain many players, and now who knows what's going on with multiverses, but it is intended to be a free-to-play game with a 2v2 multiplayer. Because if a game is popular enough, you reach a certain balance point where there's always going to be new players coming in. And if there are always new players coming in, and there's always enough of a player base, people can just play the game and learn it and get better at it. And that's one of the main problems of fighting games today. And I think that's really an important part to the success, because you can't tell me that League of Legends, for somebody that wanted to start playing today, is less intimidating or it's easier to do than learning a fighting game. And despite that, League of Legends gets probably thousands of new players every day, just the same as Apex or Call of Duty or any of these massive games. And yes, I know somebody is going to come and tell me that a large part of the success of games like League of Legends and Battle Royales is because of how dynamic they are and how that emergent gameplay then fuses with all of the social aspects in the game to make every single match different, and that's a large part of why they are addictive. I still think that there is enough in fighting games to keep them entertaining for long periods of time, especially if you put them in the hands of people that will probably buff and nerf and change things all of the time. But really, just let me dream. Sure, maybe they will never be #1, but more than they are now. The very last piece of the puzzle is that I trust Riot enough to support the game as they should. One of the things that's really going to keep that player base healthy, and that player base is important to the whole learning process and getting people into fighting games, and if there's somebody who knows how to retain that player base, it's Riot. Changes that keep things fresh, big esports tournaments, which I bet that Project L 2XKO will have tons of new characters very closely after launch to keep the hype ramping up and bring in people during that initial launch phase. New seasons that probably bring in new mechanics and bigger changes, and of course, cosmetics. That way, players that are playing stay for longer, players that leave have a higher probability of coming back, and new players have a higher chance of getting into it because they see a game that receives consistent quality content, which is also what Solid Snake uses in the Metal Gear Solid series. CQC. I'll show myself out now. So to be completely honest, I think that the premium box model, the $70 package, has been holding back fighting games from reaching that mass appeal that I think they would benefit from. For as much as some people will say that they prefer that premium box product, the truth is that fighting games nowadays are a live service just as much as anything else. These full-price fighting games also come with their long season passes, often for 2, 3, 4 seasons. They already implement very big changes, new systems, new mechanics, new characters, new everything all of the time. And they already charge you for the microtransactions in cosmetics. To be honest, sometimes we're even begging these companies to release more costumes and they don't, and then when they finally do, they're incredibly expensive and not even that good. So I don't see that much of a problem with the game being free to play as long as the gameplay parts of it are all easily accessible to the people who play it for free. And Riot more or less has done that always. Sure, the cosmetics, depending, can be very expensive, but the gameplay itself is never really gated to a higher or lesser degree, but I think it's pretty okay. And yes, there are examples of fighting games that have tried to do this model before. Like many things in fighting games, we always come back to Killer Instinct. And not just that, many other fighting games. The recent Grand Blue Fantasy Versus Rising has a free mode with a rotating cast of characters and no limitations. You can play ranked, you can do whatever you want. just that you don't own the characters, they rotate out every week. But I think that those games were just not big enough to make an impact on how the model works. And because they didn't make that impact, not enough people paid attention and wanted to get into it. And the enormous machine that is Riot Games is capable of muscling itself into any market. And the IP of League of Legends is very recognizable. As much as geriatric people like me might not want to admit it, I think that much of League of Legends cast is recognizable, more so than many fighting game staples. I think more people today would recognize Jinx or Vi or Echo than they would Jin Kazama. I guess it's mostly the cast of Arcane, right, that has helped. But you get my point. And that's another thing in 2XKO's corner to make it a success. Now, maybe it doesn't succeed. Maybe it's a terrible failure. Maybe it's a bad fighting game. But I think it really does have the potential to change everything about them, to make them more popular, and to even potentially change the way that fighting games in the future release, since they're already adapting that service model so heavily. But in a certain way, they are kind of making it even less accessible by adapting that service model, since it's now behind the price tag of the full game, plus the season passes, and sometimes with 17 different confusing versions to buy. So it's going to be really interesting to see if Riot can pull this off and start something new. Maybe we're heading into a future where we see fighting games in the top most played games consistently. And that would make me incredibly happy because I love fighting games and I want more people to play them. So yes, that's why I think that 2XKO, not going to call it Project L, I had to stop myself right there, could be so big. And I hope it is. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I've been Mug Thief. If you like the video, hit the like button. If you want more videos, hit subscribe. And as always, I will see you again very soon.